They came without a warning. No declaration, no signal, not even a threat. Just an eerie silence broken by the sudden appearance of ships blotting out the sky over every major city on Earth. Colossal things, floating without wings, casting shadows that turned day into dusk. People stopped on highways, children stared out of classroom windows, and soldiers in bases across the world froze at the sight. And for the first few minutes, everyone thought it was a dream, or maybe a hoax. But when the first plasma blast hit New York City, nobody doubted it anymore. The Ikari didn't ask for surrender. They didn't bother with diplomacy. To them, we were insects, primitive, slow, and unworthy of existing on what they now claimed as Sector 93A. Our planet, our home. They called it a reclamation, like Earth had always belonged to them, and we were just squatting here in ignorance. We weren't even worth enslaving. They wanted us wiped. In less than 2 days, they destroyed most of our satellites, crippled our comm systems, and left half the planet blind. The UN collapsed into chaos. The world's militaries were trying to fight with bullets and jets against ships that shrugged off missiles like they were mosquito bites. Cities burned. Families hid underground, hoping the monsters in the sky would miss them, hoping God was still watching. But Earth wasn't done. Humanity doesn't go down like that. It started in a bunker deep under the Rockies, NORAD's old home, long thought obsolete. What was left of Earth's leaders huddled in fear and panic, voices raised in arguments, some already calling for surrender, if the Ikari would even allow it. But then a voice cut through the noise. General Samuel Briggs, retired 5 years prior, legendary in some circles, hated in others. Known for his bluntness, his stubbornness, and his obsession with the unconventional. He stood tall in that room like he wasn't afraid of death at all. And maybe he wasn't. "I told you they'd come," he said, eyes scanning the frightened crowd. "And you laughed." "You all laughed. Nobody laughed now." Briggs didn't wait for permission. He took over what was left of Global Defense Command and pulled a handful of engineers, scientists, and hackers from every corner of the underground shelters. Not the polished officers, not the ones with medals, the misfits, the mad ones, the kind of people who thought outside the box, because the box had just been vaporized. They called it Project Scythe. No big armies, no fleets of ships, just a collection of ideas Earth had never dared to try because they were too dangerous, too unpredictable, or too insane. Things banned by international law. Weapons still in theoretical stages. Devices that bent physics until it screamed. While the world mourned, while the skies rained blue fire, Briggs and his team built hell. The first counterstrike came 6 days after the initial attack. Ikari ships hovered over the African Rift Valley, draining geothermal energy to power their expansion. They didn't even bother shielding. What could these savages possibly do? But when the Earth split open beneath them and spears of electromagnetic death surged upward, slicing their vessels in half, the aliens realized something terrifying. Humans fight back. Across the globe, from Siberia's ice fields to the Amazon jungle, humans hit back with weapons designed to kill gods. Plasma bombs hijacked from downed Ikari tech. Sound-based disruptors that made matter shake itself apart. Even railguns strapped onto freight trains, aimed at the skies like slingshots against giants. The aliens had numbers. They had power. But humans had rage. And that made all the difference. By the end of week 2, alien losses had risen to double what they'd predicted. Their scouts reported confusion. Panic. It didn't make sense. Humanity should have crumbled. They were primitive, emotion-driven, weak. But there's one thing the Ikari never understood. We weren't just defending our planet. We were avenging it. The skies above Earth were no longer quiet. What once was a serene stretch of blue had turned into a battlefield. and the Ikari, in all their technological glory, found themselves ducking for cover, a concept they hadn't experienced in over 1,000 years. They weren't prepared for it. Their models showed swift victory. Their simulations accounted for every possibility, except human madness. Briggs knew that was humanity's edge. In the bowels of an underground base in Alaska, a teenager named Ravi Singh was rewriting Ikari code with nothing but an old laptop and a custom neural interface he'd built out of scrap and spare VR parts. No military training, no clearance, just a brain that thought in lines of logic instead of language. Ravi had intercepted one of the aliens' transmission streams and realized something no one else did. "They talk in harmonics," he told Briggs, hands flying over his keyboard. "Not words, not even math. It's like music, a frequency-based encryption loop that changes every time they speak." Briggs didn't understand half of what Ravi was saying, but he trusted it, because that's what leadership looked like now, believing in the people who weren't on anyone's payroll. 2 hours later, they hijacked an Ikari command drone and rerouted it into one of their own ships. The explosion could be seen from as far away as Mongolia. The cracks in the alien invasion began to spread. Down in Brazil, guerrilla fighters who used to battle cartels now took down Ikari patrols using traps made from jungle vines, animal carcasses, and scavenged tech. In Poland, a group of miners rigged a massive EMP from the ruins of an old steel mill and dropped an entire alien scout division into darkness. The human response wasn't unified, and it wasn't pretty, but it was working, and the Ikari were starting to fear us. In orbit, Commander Jalek of the 4th Starborn Legion paced across the glowing floor of his flagship. His face was long and angular, his skin a sleek silver blue, reflecting the flickers of panic from his bridge officers. What once was a composed, noble warrior now looked weary, uncertain. "This isn't according to projections," Jalek muttered, reading the new casualty figures. "The human retaliation is disorganized, fragmented, yet effective," one of his aides whispered. "They do not operate under logic. They are emotional, erratic, undisciplined," Jalek corrected, "and unpredictable." He hated the taste of that word. Humans shouldn't have been capable of resisting this long. Every other world fell in days, some in hours. Earth was supposed to be an easy conquest, a test even. Yet now, they were bleeding. Every battle cost more. Every planetfall turned into a nightmare, and they'd barely deployed their real weapons yet. That's what scared Briggs the most. In a makeshift war room beneath what used to be a Denver skyscraper, he stood with a few remaining generals and engineers, staring at a massive holographic map riddled with red and yellow dots. "We've lost a third of the planet," one of the younger officers said grimly. "Our food systems are hanging by a thread, and medical infrastructure's down in over 70% of zones. Sir, we're winning battles, but we're losing the war." Briggs didn't blink. "We've still got one thing they'll never understand." "What's that?" He leaned forward and tapped the center of the map, where a cluster of lights blinked wildly over Eastern Europe. Insanity. Because what no alien fleet could ever comprehend was just how far humans were willing to go when cornered. We burned our own cities to keep enemies from using them. We poisoned rivers the aliens had claimed. We even sacrificed entire squadrons just to take down one enemy ship. It wasn't strategy. It was survival. And it was working. The Ikari Command began recalling their outer fleets. Reinforcements flooded Earth's orbit, preparing for one final sweep to end the conflict. Their logic told them to finish it now, before the infection of fear spread among their ranks. But Earth had a surprise waiting for them, a weapon so unstable even Earth's own nations had agreed never to use it. Briggs called it the Dust Maker, and it had just come online. The weapon had no official name in the archives. It was buried under layers of black-inked documents, filed away in sealed vaults only ghosts had access to. Nations had once agreed in hushed rooms that if humanity ever reached the brink, it should remain buried. No activation codes, no manuals, only a warning label burned into the vault's steel. This device ends everything. But Earth was at the brink. And Briggs? He didn't believe in sacred lines when the enemy was already burning the world. So they dug it up. A handful of engineers and old-world scientists who remembered its blueprints only because they'd designed it. It took 3 days and the last of Earth's high-density fusion cells to bring it back online. It wasn't a bomb. It wasn't a laser. It was worse. The dustmaker was a spatial destabilizer. It didn't explode. It unraveled. Matter, air, even time itself bent around its pulse like it couldn't decide if it wanted to exist. It had been built to be a deterrent, not a weapon of use. But now, it was the last bullet in Earth's gun. The plan was simple. Wait for the Ikari to regroup their fleet into a single cluster. Overconfident, arrogant. Let them try one final planetary purge, and then unleash the Dustmaker dead center. There'd be fallout, there'd be loss. But if it worked, Earth would still have a future. If it failed, well, then everything would die anyway. Back aboard the Ikari command vessel, Commander Jalek's fleet had grown into a monstrous armada. Hundreds of ships arranged in tight formation, their orbits synchronized in flawless military precision. His voice echoed through his fleet's neural channels. By the hour's end, the infestation will be cleansed. Fire with full power. Leave nothing breathing. Ships hummed to life. Cannons powered up. Atmosphere thinned across the planet's upper crust as the sky prepared to burn again. But something was off. One of the lead targeting vessels blinked out of existence, not exploded, not destroyed, just gone. Like it had been wiped from the canvas of reality. A moment later, 3 more disappeared the same way. No signal, no trace. Jalek stood, stunned. "What is this?" he barked. "A cloaked weapon? A distortion field?" His aides scrambled to answer, but they couldn't. Nothing in their thousands of years of warfare explained what they were seeing. This wasn't war. This was erasure. From Earth's surface, General Briggs watched the sky with gritted teeth. The launch had been triggered 48 seconds ago. The countdown was over. The weapon had fired. And now? Now the aliens were learning what human desperation looked like at its worst. The Dustmaker didn't just hit, it sang. A low vibration echoed through the ionosphere, a sound no human could hear, but every Ikari did. It resonated deep inside their bone structures, sending waves of nausea, fear, and disorientation. Then the real effect began. Space itself around their ships began to shimmer, the stars behind them bending unnaturally. The Ikari hulls, designed to withstand the fury of suns, began peeling apart like wet paper. And then they crumbled into ash, into nothing, no fire, no debris, just dust falling slowly toward Earth like snow. Jalek's command ship trembled violently. Systems failed. His crew screamed across the channel as one ship after another blinked out. The fleet was dying, not in battle, but in silence. This is not possible," Jalek muttered. "They should not possess this kind of—" But his words never finished. His ship split, twisted, and vanished. Down below, the skies cleared. Silence returned. Briggs didn't cheer. He didn't smile. He just sat down on a concrete slab outside the bunker and looked up. Ash fell like rain. He whispered, "We didn't win." An aide turned to him, confused. "Sir?" "We survived, that's all. For now." But survival was enough. The fleet was gone. Earth, bruised and broken, was still turning. And from the corners of the world, from caves and bunkers and basements once filled with fear, humanity rose. Smoke still lingered. Cities were still in ruins. But the sky was ours again. The sun rose quiet over the ruins of Tokyo, casting a pale gold light across broken glass, collapsed towers, and streets thick with the smell of ash and ozone. The war wasn't over, but for the first time in weeks, there was no fire falling from the sky, no alien shadows blotting out the light. People started coming out. At first, just a few. Nurses carrying wounded, children clutching dirty dolls, old men limping on crutches. Then more, dozens, hundreds, survivors, humans. In every corner of the globe, it was the same. From the charred plains of Australia to the flooded remains of New York, the story was repeated over and over. The aliens were gone. But no one felt like celebrating, because the cost was too high. Briggs sat alone at a steel desk deep inside the command shelter, looking at the casualty reports. Civilian death count, estimated at 3.2 billion. Infrastructure damage, unrecoverable in more than half the world's surface. Global communication, fragmented. Food and water supplies, critical. And worst of all, the dust maker had left a scar. A massive hole in the upper atmosphere where the laws of nature still twisted. Satellites that entered the field disappeared. Pilots who flew too close never returned. Whatever it touched was gone. The Ikari fleet had been turned to dust, but so had a piece of Earth's sky. A silent black void that pulsed like a heartbeat above the Pacific. And there were whispers. In the scientific communities that had survived, a theory was gaining traction. The dustmaker hadn't just destroyed, it had sent a signal, not in sound or data, but in energy. A ripple of pure, unnatural force had torn through the galaxy when it fired. And someone, or something, might have felt it. Briggs closed the report and looked at the lone photo on his desk. His daughter, Sarah, killed during the second wave. A civilian, a teacher. He hadn't even had time to bury her. The Ikari had struck her city first. Now, even with the war won, there was no peace in his heart. Only a quiet kind of rage. A question that burned inside every survivor. What now? The answer came 3 days later. From the sky. It wasn't an attack. No fire, no fleet. Just a single black pod, no larger than a car, that crashed into a field outside what used to be Berlin. Military teams surrounded it in minutes, guns raised, eyes wide. It didn't open for hours, and when it did, what stepped out wasn't what they expected. It was human, or at least, it looked human. Tall, pale-skinned, dressed in a shimmering black suit that seemed to shift colors with every blink. Its eyes were too bright, too aware, its smile too calm. "I bring greetings from the Coalition of Preservers," it said in perfect English, its voice smooth and unnatural. "We detected an illegal use of a Class 9 spatial weapon originating from your planet. We are here to investigate." Briggs was flown in personally. The figure, who identified itself only as Elian, greeted him with a polite nod and a small, too-practiced smile. "You have survived an incursion," Elian said. "We monitored your resistance. Remarkable, considering your species' current developmental stage." Briggs narrowed his eyes. "You watched?" "We are not allowed to intervene. Only observe. Until now?" Briggs clenched his jaw. "You let them slaughter billions." Elian's smile didn't waver. "They broke a law. You broke a bigger one. The dustmaker should not exist in this quadrant. Its use has consequences beyond your understanding." Briggs stood silent for a moment, then said flatly, "You want us to apologize?" Elian shook his head slowly. "Number, we want to know where you got the weapon?" Briggs didn't answer. Didn't have to. Elian read it in his silence. You made it yourselves. His tone shifted. Less curiosity, more concern. Primitive species do not build such things without help. Briggs leaned in. Maybe you've all underestimated us. Elian didn't respond. Not for a while. Then he simply said, Then you're more dangerous than we thought. He turned to go, but paused before re-entering his ship. This is not the end, General. The Ikari were arrogant. They thought you weak, but others will not make that mistake. And with that, the pod lifted into the sky and vanished into the clouds. The warning echoed in Briggs's ears long after he was back in the bunker. Earth had survived the invasion. But now, it wasn't just a planet that had fought back. It was a planet that had sent a message to the stars, and the stars were starting to listen. In the aftermath of Elian's visit, something changed in the air. It wasn't fear. Earth had already been bathed in that. It wasn't relief either, because no one really believed they were safe. What settled across the planet now was anticipation, sharp and electric, like standing in a thunderstorm and knowing the lightning hadn't struck yet. In the ruins of Moscow, where children played between broken tanks and alien bones, people began talking about Elian. Some said he was a warning. Others said he was the beginning of something bigger. The survivors weren't just rebuilding homes anymore. They were preparing. The world no longer saw itself as a collection of divided nations. It was Earth, and it had enemies out there. Briggs knew it too. He'd seen it in Elian's eyes, that flicker of unease. Whatever that being represented, it didn't expect humans to claw their way out of extinction. But humans didn't win by playing fair. They won by not dying. And that was enough. The next few weeks moved fast. What was left of world governments merged into a shaky, tense alliance called the Earth Continuum. No one liked the name, but it was the only thing they could all agree on besides not dying again. They combined resources, data, even soldiers, anything they had left. But their most important work wasn't military, it was scientific. Deep beneath the Swiss Alps, inside what had once been CERN, a new facility was being carved out by hand and machine. They called it the Forge. It was where Earth's smartest survivors, physicists, hackers, even rogue engineers, gathered to figure out exactly what the Dustmaker had done. Not just to the Ikari fleet, but to reality. Ravi Singh was there, naturally. He was now considered Earth's most dangerous asset, even though he still wore the same hoodie and still lived off protein bars. But inside his mind were equations that didn't belong to Earth anymore. I think we woke something up, he said one night, hunched over a monitor. The universe. It noticed us. A German physicist leaned in. You mean Elian? No, Ravi said without looking away. I mean the universe, something big, something old. At first no one believed him. Then the echoes began. Across the globe, strange phenomena started to surface. Machines that powered themselves without energy, voices in data streams that didn't come from Earth, people dreaming of star systems they couldn't name. And in several places, survivors reported brief, flickering visions of ships that weren't there. Yet. Earth hadn't just fought off an invasion. It had torn a hole in something ancient. The Dustmaker's pulse had been more than a weapon. It had rattled the cage. And now the universe was stirring. Back in Alaska, Briggs met with an old friend, Dr. Elaine Voss, once a leading astrophysicist, now wrapped in blankets and scars, haunted by the things she'd seen from orbit. They're coming, John, she said, staring out across the frozen horizon. Who? The ones who used to control weapons like the Dustmaker. The ones who made it illegal. Briggs frowned. You think Elian was just the front? Elaine nodded slowly. The coalition he mentioned? They're not peacekeepers. They're wardens. They didn't save us because they don't care about lives. They care about control. Briggs looked down at his hands. They still shook sometimes, not from fear, from rage. So we made too much noise. Elaine gave him a look that chilled him more than the wind outside. We screamed. He walked back into his command bunker later that night with a new mission. They couldn't wait for the next enemy to come. They had to prepare, learn, adapt, because Earth didn't just need soldiers anymore. It needed guardians. The forge was accelerated. New designs were drawn. Recovered Ikari tech was reverse-engineered and fused with human innovation. Weapons that once seemed like science fiction were being assembled in real time. And in orbit, Earth launched its first real attempt at a unified defense platform, Project Sentinel. A ring of satellites and repurposed alien drones rigged with particle disruptors, EMP nets, and an AI core based on Ravi's cracked Ikari language protocols. The message was simple. Earth isn't easy prey anymore. But even as hope sparked in the ashes deep beneath the forge, Ravi made a discovery that turned his blood to ice. The Dustmaker hadn't just fired once. It had rippled like a beacon. And something was coming toward it. Something not Ikari, not Elian's coalition, something older than both. Ravi stared at the screen, eyes wide, lips parted slightly, barely breathing. The forge's AI core, nicknamed Lazarus, was cycling through deep space telemetry, trying to trace the aftershock patterns from the Dustmaker's activation. But it wasn't what he expected. It wasn't just energy, it was language, or something trying to be. Buried in the signal wave, wrapped around the ripples like thorns around a vine, was structure. Frequency intervals repeating at mathematical intervals that shouldn't occur naturally. Code masquerading as static. And the message was pulsing back. "Something's listening," Ravi whispered. Behind him, Dr. Morales, a linguist turned decoder from old MIT, leaned in. "Are you saying it's talking to us?" "No." Ravi sat back, rubbing his temple. "I think it's warning us." At the same time, far above Earth's newly repaired orbit, the Sentinel array caught a ghost. A blur. Just for a moment. One of the outer satellites, the Kelvin 9, registered a tear in space, a rupture in the background radiation like claws dragging across silk. No ship, no heat trail, just absence, like something was folding in rather than arriving. Command scrambled to get visuals. There were none. And then it vanished. Back on Earth, Briggs was informed immediately. He stood in silence, staring at the report, then muttered, "We just became the flashlight in the dark. And now the monsters are looking back." The Continuum Council convened the next day. Representatives from what was left of the great nations, China, the remnants of the US, the African Confederation, the Pacific Alliance, each sent envoys. They didn't argue like they used to. The war had changed them. Pride had a lower price now. Ravi presented his findings. "What we activated," he explained, pulling up a crude model, "wasn't just a weapon, it was a key." "A key to what?" someone asked. "A prison," he replied softly. Gasps, murmurs. He continued, "The Dustmaker was originally part of a chain reaction weapon designed by an ancient species. Older than the Ikari, older than even Elian's coalition. We only had a fragment, but it was enough to rattle the bars. And now whatever's behind those bars," Briggs added, "knows we're here." One of the delegates, an old Japanese general, folded his arms. "Then we should bury the tech, dismantle it, make Earth small again." But Ravi shook his head. "It's too late for that. We've already made the noise. The galaxy knows we're here. The question now is, do we cower or do we evolve?" Briggs stood beside him. "We don't back down." That night, humanity made its choice. The Forge expanded. Sentinel launched Phase 2, an orbital fleet initiative codenamed Titan Watch, a new type of ship, blending Akari materials with Earth engineering. Small, fast, brutal. They were called Dustborn. Pilots were recruited. Trained in silence, far from the public eye. Volunteers only. Survivors. The kind of people who'd already lost everything and had nothing left but the urge to fight. One of them was a girl from São Paulo who'd seen her entire family turned to ash in the first wave. Another was a soldier from Johannesburg who'd single-handedly taken down an Akari scout ship with nothing but stolen explosives and spite. These weren't heroes. They were warnings in human form. And they flew under one banner. Let them come. Back beneath the forge, Ravi kept working. The signal was still active, still growing stronger. He traced it farther than he ever thought possible, past the stars humans could see, past where even the Akari dared to go. And he found it, a system where light bent wrong, where suns collapsed into each other like dying lungs, where gravity screamed. The signal was coming from inside that. Briggs, when told, didn't speak for a long time. Then he looked up and said only this. "Prepare a team." "What for?" Ravi asked. Briggs's voice was like steel on concrete. "We're going to knock on the Devil's Door." The mission was codenamed Project Hades. Its goal wasn't defense. It wasn't diplomacy. It was reconnaissance in hell. A 6-person crew. One ship, the Valkyrie 1, the first of the Dustborn fleet with interstellar capabilities, a fusion of Earth's blunt force engineering and the Akari's sleek spatial fold tech. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't pretty, but it could bend space for 7 seconds at a time, just enough to leap light years and come back in one piece. Maybe? Briggs handpicked the crew himself. Captain Naomi Rowe, former Special Forces, survivor of the Osaka incursion. Cold-eyed, level-headed, and known for executing orders with surgical precision, even when those orders involved mercy killings. Kai Ghost Lumen, a cybernetic ex-hacker turned pilot who lost half his skull in a raid on a downed Akari spire. What remained was wrapped in carbon steel and sarcasm. Dr. Jules Nair, biologist and linguist, who claimed to have dreamed of the strange language in the Dustmaker's signal, long before Ravi ever decoded it. Lieutenant Isaiah Cross, artillery specialist and demolitions expert. He laughed when he lit explosives, and never looked back when they went off. And finally, Ravi himself. Not because he wanted to go, but because he had to. The signal was calling him. Literally. He hadn't slept in 5 days before launch. Every time he closed his eyes, the stars whispered. Every time he blinked, he saw the same thing. A world of shattered moons, a sky without light, and something vast wrapped in chains of void. The 6th crew member wasn't human. It was Lazarus, the AI. Installed into Valkyrie's core, it now spoke with unsettling calm, and a voice slightly too human. It had learned emotion from Ravi, adapted sarcasm from Kai, curiosity from Jules, and now it watched them all, quietly, carefully. The launch was silent, no crowds, no news, just a ship tearing a hole through space and vanishing into blackness. What greeted them on the other side was wrong. There was no star, just dark matter orbiting nothing. Planets with no rotation. Frozen winds circle in pits that dropped straight through reality. The ship's instruments jittered, unsure if they were looking at matter or memory. Then they found the source. An object in orbit around a shattered planet. Not a satellite, not a ship. A monolith, black, endless, floating on an axis that didn't exist. The signal was pouring from it, constant, pulsing like a beacon or a scream. Jules whispered, "It's not transmitting, it's bleeding." Rowe gave the order. "Suit up. Approach on foot." Valkyrie's small landing pod detached, sailing down in silence. As they neared the monolith, Lazarus spoke through their helmet comms. This structure is older than your star. It should not exist in this dimension. Kai muttered. Cool. So we're officially inside a cosmic mistake. They landed on what used to be the surface of a planet. Now it was little more than broken ground and stuttering gravity fields. Time moved weirdly, sometimes fast, sometimes slow. Ravi saw his own breath hang for minutes before vanishing. And then, the monolith opened. Not like a door, more like a thought, like reality around it gave permission. Inside was light, and memory, and pain. The walls weren't made of matter, they were made of moments, time itself frozen and stitched into architecture. They saw visions, stars dying, species begging, wars fought with silence, machines crucified on black suns. In the center of the monolith floated a seed, black as ink, small, but pulsing like a heart. Jules stepped forward. It's not a signal, she said, tears sliding down her cheeks. It's a warning buoy, a message to the jailers, the ones who locked it away. Ravi's voice cracked. Then why is it still pulsing? They turned to leave, and the seed opened. A voice, not sound, not words, but meaning, flooded into their minds. Unshackled, released, witness me. Lazarus screamed through every channel. Breach! Reality integrity collapsing! The crew barely made it back to the pod. Space around the monolith began twisting, like it was trying to rewrite itself. A ripple surged through the system, faster than light, faster than thought. Back aboard Valkyrie, Ro barked, "Get us the hell out of here!" Ravi whispered, "We woke something up." Kai slammed the drive. The stars bent, they jumped, but something came with them. A whisper, a crack in reality, a footprint left behind. Earth had screamed into the void. Now the void had whispered back. When Valkyrie 1 emerged back into normal space, orbiting high above Earth, everything was wrong. The sky looked familiar, but the instruments didn't agree. Gravitational pull was off by 0.04%. Atmospheric particles had microscopic distortions in their atomic structure, and Earth's magnetosphere pulsed like it had a heartbeat. Something had followed them through the fold, something that didn't fully exist in their dimension, but now had a foothold. Ravi knew it immediately. "We didn't just wake it up," he said, voice dry. "We invited it." Briggs was already waiting at the Forge's re-entry pad. As soon as they stepped out, the silence told them everything. There were no soldiers, no technicians, just empty corridors and a whisper in the air that made the back of your skull itch. Ravi looked around. "Where is everyone?" Briggs appeared at the far end of the corridor, flanked by 2 dust-borne sentinels. He looked older, tired. "We evacuated the Forge 3 hours ago," he said. "The pulse you triggered, whatever it was, it hit every system. Power surges, static bleeding from speakers. Some people started screaming in languages they didn't speak. Others just vanished." "Vanished? Like smoke." Kai blinked. "Hell is leaking." Lazarus had transferred to the Forge's mainframe the moment they docked. It was analyzing everything, sky patterns, electromagnetic shifts, even dreams recorded through neural interfaces. And it confirmed the worst. The monolith wasn't just a beacon, it was a lock, a fail-safe. And now it was open. The thing they had awakened, whatever ancient malevolent intelligence had been kept in that void system. It was not a god. It was a mistake, a forgotten consequence from the beginning of time, a parasite looking for minds to nest in. And it had marked Earth. Already, reports poured in. People in deep REM sleep who never woke up. Others who did, screaming and convulsing until their eyes turned black and their voices echoed in multiple tones. Machines that refused to shut down, muttering lines of impossible code, building strange geometric shapes out of whatever materials were nearby. Entire towns had gone dark. Something was growing, and it was learning. Briggs called an emergency command council. There was only one option left. Ravi stood in the center of the room, eyes red from lack of sleep. "We need to send it back. Seal the door, permanently." "How?" someone asked. "We rebuild the dust maker." A ripple of fear hit the room. "You want to use the same thing that opened the gate?" asked Jules, stunned. "No," Ravi said. "I want to complete it." He explained. The dust maker they used was only a piece, a half-weapon designed to collapse enemy fleets with spatial resonance. But its original purpose, before it was ever fragmented, was to destroy realities, to delete spaces from the cosmic fabric entirely, not kill, not damage, erase. If they finished the design, rebuilt the full dust maker, and used it on the monolith's echo signature, they might be able to sever Earth from the infection, cut the connection before it fully manifested. "But it'll cost everything," Ravi added. "The forge, the system, the people nearby. It'll burn our orbit clean." Briggs didn't hesitate. "Do it." It took 36 hours. Every dust-borne ship fed its energy core into the reconstruction. Lazarus reprogrammed the final detonation code, installing it into a single-use satellite. They named it Prometheus. Valkyrie 1 flew one final time, into the upper atmosphere, dragging Prometheus behind it. Ravi was aboard. He refused to let anyone else be the one to press the button. As he watched the clouds part and saw Earth beneath him, blue, cracked, scarred, beautiful, he whispered into the comms, "If this works, forget us. Don't build again. Don't scream into the dark. Just live." Then he pushed the button. Prometheus ignited. The sky turned white. Everything went still. 10 years later. The forge is gone. The orbital field is dead, but Earth survived. Barely. No more alien tech. No more signals. No more Lazarus. Just silence. The air was thick with the smell of rust and ash, a metallic tang that clung to the back of your throat and refused to let go. Out there, beyond the cracked hull of the Elysium dawn, the stars burned cold and indifferent, witnesses to a war no one had seen coming. Captain Marcus Kane stood at the viewport, his hands clenched into fists so tight his knuckles gleamed white against the dim emergency lighting. The crew moved silently behind him, shadows darting between flickering consoles, their faces drawn with exhaustion and something darker, something that tasted like fear but had hardened into resolve. They'd all heard the transmission, every last one of them, and it had changed everything. It had come crackling through the comms 3 hours ago, a garbled burst of static from the colony on Praxis 9. The voice belonged to a kid, couldn't have been more than 10, screaming, pleading, until it cut off with a wet, choking sound that still echoed in Marcus's skull. Then the Crixani had followed, their guttural language slithering through the speakers like oil over water. They'd issued their terms. Surrender the system, hand over the mining rights, and maybe, just maybe, they'd let the survivors limp back to Earth. No mention of the kids, no mention of the blood Marcus knew was pooling on the floors of those prefab homes. The Crixani didn't negotiate with prey. They devoured it. Marcus had warned them. 2 years back, when the first Crixani scout ships sniffed around the edge of human space, he'd been there, standing on the deck of a diplomatic frigate, staring down their ambassador, a 7-foot nightmare of chitin and claws. "Harm a human child," he'd said, voice steady as steel, "and you won't live to regret it." The translator had buzzed, spitting his words into their tongue, and the ambassador's mandibles had twitched, a sound like laughter scraping out of its throat. They hadn't believed him. They'd thought humans were soft, fragile, little more than cattle with delusions of grandeur. They'd been wrong. Now Praxis 9 was burning, and the Elysium Dawn was the closest ship in range. Marcus turned from the viewport, his gray eyes catching the light like a blade's edge. "Status," he barked, and Lieutenant Reza snapped to attention, her fingers trembling slightly as she pulled up the scans. "They've got 3 warships in orbit," she said, voice tight. "Particle cannons hot, shields at full. Ground forces are entrenched. Looks like they've rounded up the colonists into holding pens. No life signs from the eastern sector. None." Marcus's jaw tightened. The eastern sector was where the school had been. He didn't need to ask what that meant. "And the kids?" Reza hesitated, her dark eyes flicking to the floor before meeting his again. "Some are still alive. Thermal scans show smaller heat signatures in the pens. But not many. Not many." The words hit like a punch to the gut, but Marcus didn't flinch. He couldn't. Not now. "Get me a line to the fleet," he said, "and arm everything we've got." The crew didn't question him. They'd seen the footage from the outer colonies, Crixani claws tearing through steel doors, families dragged screaming into the dark. Humans weren't the strongest species out here, not the fastest or the toughest, but they had something the Crixani didn't understand. A line you didn't cross. A promise you didn't break. And when that line was crossed, when that promise was shattered, humans didn't just fight. They burned the universe down to make it right. Within minutes, the Elysium Dawn hummed with power, its railguns charging, missiles locking into place. Marcus patched through to the fleet, his voice steady despite the rage boiling under his skin. "This is Captain Kane, Elysium Dawn. Praxis 9 is under attack. Crixani forces have killed our people, our kids. I'm going in. Anyone who's got the stomach for it, follow me. Anyone who doesn't, stay the hell out of my way." The response was immediate. Ships across the sector lit up the comms, freighters, haulers, even a few patched-up civilian rigs. No one said no. Not today. Marcus cut the line and turned to his crew. "We're not here to negotiate. We're not here to survive. We're here to make them pay, every last one of them." Reza nodded, her lips pressed into a thin line. The helmsman, a wiry kid named Torres, cracked his knuckles and grinned like he'd been waiting for this his whole life. The Elysium Dawn lurched forward, engines roaring as it broke from its patrol route and hurtled toward Praxis 9. The Crixani warships loomed on the scanners, their sleek insectoid hulls glinting against the planet's atmosphere. They didn't know what was coming. They didn't know what humans became when you took something they loved. Marcus thought of that kid's voice, the scream cut short, and his hands tightened on the command console. The Crixani had been warned. They'd laughed. Now they'd learn. Space itself seemed to hold its breath as the Elysium Dawn closed the distance, a lone spark racing toward a firestorm, and in Marcus's chest, something cold and unyielding took root. A promise not just to fight, but to win. For the kids. For the blood already spilled. For the warning they'd ignored. The first shot rang out, a railgun slug tearing through the void, and the war began. The Elysium Dawn shuddered as the first Crixani particle beam grazed its hull, a searing streak of violet light that carved a molten scar across the port side. Alarms blared, a shrill cacophony that drowned out the crew's shouts as they scrambled to their stations. Marcus Kane gripped the edge of the command console, his gray eyes locked on the tactical display where red blips swarmed like hornets around the green dot of his ship. The Crixani warships were closing in, their movements precise, predatory, 3 against 1. Outnumbered, outgunned, and outclassed. Any sane captain would have turned tail and run. But Marcus wasn't sane anymore. Not after that kid's scream. Torres, evasive pattern Delta, he roared, voice cutting through the chaos. The helmsman's hands flew across the controls, and the ship lurched hard to starboard, engines screaming as they pushed past their limits. A second beam missed by inches, sizzling through the void where they'd been moments before. Reza, target their lead ship. Railguns and missiles, full spread. Hit them where it hurts. Lieutenant Reza didn't hesitate, her fingers dancing over the weapons console. Locked and loaded, sir. Firing now. The Elysium Dawn spat fury into the dark, railgun slugs accelerating to hypersonic speeds, followed by a salvo of missiles trailing fiery tails. The lead Crixani ship, a jagged monstrosity bristling with spines, took the brunt of it. Explosions bloomed across its hull, chunks of chitinous armor spinning into space, but it didn't falter. The Crixani built their ships like they built their bodies, hard, relentless, and damn near unbreakable. "They're returning fire!" Torres yelled, and the deck tilted as another beam slammed into the shields. The lights flickered, and Marcus felt the impact in his bones, a deep, rattling shudder that promised worse to come. The shields were holding, for now, but they wouldn't last forever. He didn't care. This wasn't about survival. This was about reaching Praxis 9, about getting to those pens where the kids were still alive, their tiny heat signatures flickering on the scans like candles in a storm. "Fleet's inbound, sir," Reza said, her voice steady despite the sweat beading on her forehead. "ETA 10 minutes. They're patching through. Admiral Voss wants a word." "Put her on," Marcus growled. The comms crackled, and a woman's voice came through, sharp and clipped, the kind of voice that could cut glass. "Kane, what the hell are you doing? You're one ship against 3. You'll be scrap before we get there." Marcus didn't blink. "They've got our kids, Voss. Killed most of them already. I'm not waiting." A pause, heavy with static. Then, "You're insane, but we're coming. Hold them off, Kane. That's an order." "Wasn't planning on dying yet," he said, and cut the line. He turned to the crew, their faces lit by the glow of sparking consoles. "You heard her? 10 minutes. We keep them busy, we buy time for the fleet, and then we tear them apart." The Elysium Dawn dove into the fray, weaving through a storm of particle beams and kinetic rounds. Torres pushed the ship to its breaking point, dodging with a reckless grace that defied physics. Reza unleashed everything they had, missiles and railguns hammering the Crixani lead ship until its shields flickered and died. The first kill came with a satisfying flash. A missile punched through the enemy's hull, igniting its core in a silent, brilliant fireball. The crew didn't cheer. There was no time. The other 2 ships adjusted, their movements eerily synchronized, and the barrage intensified. Marcus's mind raced, replaying that transmission, the kid's voice breaking into sobs before the silence. He'd seen the colony logs before the attack. Praxis 9 had been a backwater, a speck of dirt with a few thousand souls, mostly miners and their families, kids who'd grown up chasing each other through dusty streets, dreaming of Earth they'd never seen. Now they were gone, or worse, caged by monsters who didn't even see them as alive, just meat to leverage a deal. His fists tightened until his nails bit into his palms, drawing blood. "Sir, shields at 30%, Reza called. "We can't take much more." "Then don't," Marcus snapped. "Ram the bastard if you have to. Just keep them off the planet." Torres shot him a wild grin. "You serious, Cap?" "Dead serious." The helmsman laughed, a sharp, jagged sound, and angled the Elysium Dawn toward the second Crixani ship. It was a desperate move, a suicide play, but Marcus didn't care. The Crixani had underestimated humans once, thinking them weak, pliable. They didn't know what happened when you backed a human into a corner, when you took their kids and left them nothing to lose. The ship surged forward, engines roaring, a battered arrow aimed at the heart of the enemy. And then the scanners lit up, green blips flooding in from the edge of the system. The fleet. Freighters retrofitted with guns, haulers bristling with makeshift weapons, civilian ships that had no business in a fight, but were here anyway. Humans. Not soldiers, not warriors, just people who'd heard the same transmission Marcus had, who'd felt the same rage. The Crixani ships hesitated, their formation faltering as the odds shifted. Marcus bared his teeth in something that wasn't a smile. "Now," he said, "let's show them what happens when they don't listen." The Elysium dawn struck, and the void erupted in fire. The Elysium dawn collided with the second Crixani warship in a scream of metal and fire, a glancing blow that sent both ships spinning through the void. The impact threw Marcus Kane against the command console, his shoulder slamming into the edge with a crack he felt more than heard. Pain flared, hot and sharp, but he ignored it, hauling himself upright as the deck tilted beneath his feet. Sparks rained from the ceiling, and the air tasted of ozone and blood. The crew clung to their stations, faces pale but fierce, their eyes reflecting the chaos outside where the human fleet swarmed the Crixani like wolves on a wounded beast. "Damage report," Marcus shouted, his voice hoarse over the wail of alarms. Reza coughed, wiping a streak of soot from her face as she scanned the readouts. "Shields are gone, sir. Hull breaches on decks 3 and 4. Emergency seals holding, but we've lost 2 railguns. Engines at 60%. "Enough to fight," Marcus said, more to himself than her. He straightened, ignoring the ache in his shoulder, and stared at the tactical display. The second Crixani ship was crippled, its hull venting atmosphere in shimmering plumes, but the third was still intact, its particle cannons carving through the human fleet with ruthless precision. Freighters exploded in silent bursts, civilian rigs torn apart before they could fire a shot. These weren't trained soldiers, just miners, traders, parents who'd grabbed whatever they could and come running. And they were dying. "Torres, get us between that bastard and the fleet," Marcus ordered. "Reza, reroute power to the forward guns, everything we've got left." Torres didn't argue, though his grin had faded, replaced by a grim set to his jaw. The Elysium dawn groaned as it turned, its engines sputtering but obedient, thrusting the battered ship into the line of fire. A particle beam raked across their bow, and the whole vessel shuddered, lights dimming as power drained to the weapons. Reza fired back, a desperate volley of missiles and railgun slugs that slammed into the third Crixani ship's shields, cracking them like glass. It wasn't enough to kill it, not yet, but it bought the fleet a breath, a chance to regroup. Marcus's gaze flicked to the planet below. Praxis 9's surface a smear of brown and gray through the atmosphere. Somewhere down there, the kids were still alive, trapped in those pens, waiting for someone to come. He could almost hear their cries, faint echoes of that transmission looping in his mind. He'd promised the Crixani they'd pay, and he meant it. But promises didn't mean a damn thing if he couldn't get to them. "Sir, incoming transmission," Reza said, her voice cutting through his thoughts. "It's the Crixani." Marcus's blood ran cold. "Patch it through." The comms hissed, and that guttural, oily voice filled the bridge, the translator struggling to keep up. "Human vessel, you fight without honor. Surrender now, or we slaughter the young ones. One by one. Slowly." A chill swept through the crew, a collective intake of breath. Marcus felt it too, a spike of ice in his gut, but it burned away under the heat of his rage. He leaned into the comms, his voice low and lethal. "You think you can threaten us? You think that'll stop us? We warned you, harm a human child and you're done. Start killing, and I'll make sure your entire species feels it." The Crixani didn't respond immediately, its silence heavy, calculating. Then a sound came through. Not words, but a high, keening wail, unmistakably human. A child's scream, raw and terrified, cut off by a wet crunch. The line went dead. Marcus stood frozen, the sound searing into his soul. The bridge was silent, every eye on him, waiting. He turned to the viewport, staring at the Crixani ship, its insectoid bulk a dark stain against the stars. "Torres," he said, his voice a blade. "Full speed. Ram them." "Sir!" Reza started, but he cut her off with a look. "They just killed one of ours, on purpose, to make a point." His hands shook, not with fear but with a fury so deep it felt like it could crack the hull. "We're not waiting for the fleet. We end this now." Torres nodded, his hand steady as he pushed the throttle to its limit. The Elysium Dawn surged forward, a dying beast with one last fight in it, aimed straight at the Crixani ship. The enemy fired, beams tearing into the hull. But Marcus didn't flinch. He saw the pens in his mind, the kids huddling together, their parents gone, their hope fading. He saw that ambassador's twitching mandibles, the laughter that had mocked his warning. They'd thought humans were weak. They'd thought wrong. The fleet rallied behind them, inspired or insane, it didn't matter. Ships of every make and model charging into the fray. The Crixani ship loomed closer, its shields flickering under the Elysium Dawn's relentless barrage. Marcus braced himself, the collision seconds away, when a new blip appeared on the scanners, massive, fast, and human. A dreadnought, the Vindicator flagship of the sector fleet, dropping out of hyperspace with guns blazing. "Hold course!" Marcus barked, and the Elysium Dawn struck, a glancing blow that ripped through the Crixani's weakened shields. The Vindicator followed, its cannons unleashing hell, and the enemy ship erupted in a cascade of fire and debris. Marcus exhaled, his breath ragged, but there was no relief, only the burning need to get to the surface. The kids were still down there, and the Crixani weren't done paying. The Elysium Dawn hung in the void, a broken husk trailing smoke and sparks, its hull scarred from the collision that had crippled the last Crixani warship. Marcus Kane stood amidst the wreckage of the bridge, his breath fogging in the cold as emergency systems struggled to keep the ship alive. The Vindicator loomed nearby, mopping up the debris with surgical precision, but Marcus's eyes were fixed on Praxis 9 below. The kids were still down there, their faint heat signatures a fragile thread pulling him forward. That scream over the comms, cut short by a Crixani claw, played on a loop in his skull, fueling a rage that drowned out the pain in his shoulder. "Reza, can we land?" he asked, voice rough as gravel. She glanced at the flickering consoles, her face grim. "Engines are barely holding, sir. We've got one shot, crash landing maybe. No guarantees we walk away." "Do it," Marcus said without hesitation. "Torres, plot us a course, straight for those pens." Torres nodded, hands shaking as he wrestled the dying ship into position. The Elysium Dawn groaned, its frame trembling as it nosed toward the planet. The Vindicator hailed them, Admiral Voss's voice crackling through. "Kane, stand down. We'll handle the ground assault. You're in no shape to fight." "They're killing kids, Voss," Marcus snapped. "I'm not waiting." He cut the line, ignoring her protests. The descent began, a fiery plunge through the atmosphere that rattled the ship apart. Bulkheads buckled, and a section of the ceiling collapsed, nearly crushing Reza. She cursed, dragging herself free, blood trickling from a gash on her forehead. The ground rushed up, a blur of dust and ruin, and the Elysium Dawn hit hard, skidding across Praxis 9's surface in a shower of dirt and metal. Marcus was thrown forward, slamming into the viewport, but he forced himself up, adrenaline numbing the pain. "Gear up," he barked, grabbing a rifle from the armory rack. The crew followed, battered but unbroken, their faces set with the same fire burning in him. They spilled out into a wasteland of shattered homes and smoldering craters. The air stank of death, and in the distance, the Crixani pens loomed, crude cages of twisted steel. Marcus moved fast, his boots crunching over debris until he saw them. Dozens of kids, filthy and wide-eyed, pressed against the bars. A Crixani guard turned, its claws dripping red, and Marcus fired without thinking, the slug punching through its skull. The kids screamed, some sobbing, others staring in silence as Marcus tore the cage open. "You're safe now," he lied, knowing more Crixani were coming. He looked into their hollow eyes, saw the cost of his delay, and swore the bastards would pay in blood. The Vindicator's dropships roared overhead, but Marcus was already moving, rifle raised, ready to finish what he'd started. Dust swirled around Marcus Kane as he knelt by the shattered cage, his rifle still warm from the shot that had dropped the Crixani guard. The kids stumbled out, some clinging to each other, others too stunned to move, their small bodies trembling under layers of grime and fear. A girl, no older than 8, stared up at him with eyes like cracked glass, her voice a whisper. "They took my brother." Marcus's chest tightened, the weight of her words sinking into him like a blade. He wanted to promise he'd find the boy, bring him back, but the lie stuck in his throat. He'd heard the crunch over the comms. He knew what it meant. "Stay close," he said instead, his voice rough but steady. "We're getting you out." The crew fanned out, forming a ragged perimeter around the kids. Reza with her pistol drawn, Torres clutching a shotgun, their faces hard despite the exhaustion carving lines into their skin. Above, the Vindicator's dropships touched down, kicking up storms of dirt as Marines poured out, their armor gleaming against the desolation. But Marcus didn't wait for them. He couldn't. The Crixani were still here, their guttural roars echoing from the ruins, and every second meant another life snuffed out. He led the group forward, weaving through the wreckage of Praxis 9's streets, prefab homes reduced to twisted metal, playgrounds buried under ash. The kids shuffled behind him, their footsteps soft but heavy with the silence of trauma. Reza flanked him, her breath ragged, the gash on her forehead still bleeding. "Scanners picked up movement, sir," she muttered. 200 meters east. Big group. They're coming." "Let them," Marcus growled, his grip tightening on the rifle. He glanced back at the kids, their pale faces lit by the flicker of distant fires, and felt that cold, unyielding thing in his chest twist sharper. The Crixani hadn't just attacked a colony. They'd targeted the weakest, the ones humans would die to protect. It wasn't strategy, it was cruelty, and it was a mistake. The first wave hit like a storm, Crixani warriors charging from the shadows, their claws glinting, mandibles snapping with that sickening click. Marcus fired, slugs tearing through chitin, dropping 2 before they could close the gap. Torres roared, his shotgun blasting a third into a spray of gore, while Reza picked off stragglers with precise, furious shots. The kids screamed, huddling behind a fallen wall as the fight turned brutal. Claws raked at Marcus's arm, slicing through his suit, but he drove his rifle butt into the creature's skull, feeling it crack under the blow. The Marines arrived mid-chaos, their rifles lighting up the night, and the Crixani faltered, their numbers thinning. Marcus didn't stop, pushing forward, his vision narrowing to the next target, then the next. Blood slicked his hands. His own. Theirs, it didn't matter. He saw that ambassador's laughter in every twitching mandible, heard that kid scream in every clash of steel and bone. They'd been warned. They hadn't listened. A shadow loomed ahead, a Crixani commander, taller than the rest, its armor scarred and dripping with red. It held a human arm, small and limp, like a trophy. Marcus froze, the sight punching through his rage into something raw, something that hurt. The commander hissed, its voice grating through the translator. "You fight for nothing, human. Your young are gone. Your world will follow." Marcus didn't answer with words. He charged, rifle blazing, rounds slamming into the commander's chest. It staggered but swung, claws slashing across his side, tearing flesh. Pain seared through him, but he dropped the rifle, drew his knife, and drove it into the creature's throat, twisting until black ichor sprayed his face. It collapsed, gurgling, and he stood over it, breathing hard, the arm still clutched in its dead grip. He turned, ignoring the agony in his side, and saw the kids watching, wide-eyed, silent. The Marines swept in, securing the area, but Marcus barely noticed. He knelt, picking up the arm, its tiny fingers curled as if reaching for something lost. It was too small, too fragile, and it broke something in him he hadn't known was still whole. He set it down gently, his hands shaking, and looked at the girl who'd spoken earlier. She was crying now, quiet sobs that cut deeper than any claw. "We're not done," he said, more to himself than her. The Crixani had retreated, but their ships still orbited, their forces still held parts of the planet. The Vindicator could handle the sky, but the ground was his. He stood, wincing as blood seeped through his torn suit, and nodded to Reza. "Round up the survivors. We're hunting." She hesitated, her eyes flicking to his wounds. "Sir, you need—" "I need them dead," he cut her off, his voice a low snarl. "Every last one." He turned east, where the scanners had pinged, and started walking, the kids' soft steps trailing behind him like ghosts. The war wasn't over. Not until the Crixani learned what humans did when you crossed that line. The wind howled across Praxis 9's ruined landscape, carrying the stench of charred metal and alien blood as Marcus Kane led his ragged band eastward. His side throbbed with every step, the gash from the Crixani commander's claws leaking through the hasty bandage Reza had slapped on during a brief pause. The kids trailed behind, a silent procession of hollow eyes and trembling hands, their trust in him a weight heavier than the rifle slung across his back. He didn't look at them. Couldn't. Afraid he'd see that small, severed arm in every shadow, a reminder of how late he'd been. Reza marched beside him, her pistol gripped tight, her face a mask of determination despite the blood crusting her forehead. Torres brought up the rear, shotgun ready, his usual bravado replaced by a quiet intensity that matched the Marines fanning out around them. The Vindicator's dropships had secured the landing zone, but the Crixani still held ground, entrenched in the eastern sector, where the scanners had last pinged a mass of heat signatures. Marcus didn't know if it was more kids or just soldiers waiting to die. Either way, he was coming for them. The terrain shifted as they approached, a sprawl of mining rigs and storage silos, twisted into a jagged maze by the attack. The air grew thick, heavy with the hum of Crixani tech, a low vibration that set Marcus's teeth on edge. He raised a fist, signaling the group to halt, and crouched behind a toppled crane. Ahead, the enemy waited, a fortified outpost, its walls bristling with turrets, Crixani warriors pacing like ants around a nest, and there, in the center, another pen, smaller, cruder, but unmistakable. More kids. Marcus's breath caught, his rage flaring anew. He counted at least 20 guards, their claws glinting in the dim light, and 2 hulking figures, elites, maybe, their armor thicker, movements deliberate. The turrets swiveled, scanning the perimeter, and he knew a frontal assault would be suicide. But waiting wasn't an option, not with those kids so close, their faint cries drifting on the wind. "Reza, Torres, flank left with half the Marines," he whispered, his voice a low growl. "Draw their fire. I'll take the rest right. Hit the pen directly." Reza's eyes narrowed. "Sir, you're bleeding out. Let me—" No, he snapped, cutting her off. They don't get another second with those kids. She held his gaze, then nodded, slipping away with Torres and a handful of Marines. Marcus turned to the remaining soldiers, their faces grim but resolute. Fast and hard. We get in, get the kids, get out. No heroics, just results. The plan ignited moments later. Reza's team opened fire from the left, a barrage of bullets and grenades that lit up the night. The Krixani reacted instantly, turrets swinging, warriors charging toward the distraction. Marcus moved, leading his group in a sprint across open ground, his side screaming with every stride. A turret caught them mid-run, its beam slicing through a Marine beside him, reducing the man to ash. Marcus didn't stop, didn't flinch, his focus locked on the pen. He reached it first, slamming into the bars with a shoulder that nearly gave out. Inside, a dozen kids cowered, their faces streaked with dirt and tears. A Krixani elite loomed over them, its claw raised, but Marcus was faster. His rifle barked, slugs tearing through its chest. It staggered, roaring, and he fired again, dropping it in a heap. The Marines caught up, blasting the lock, and the cage sprang open. "Move!" Marcus shouted, ushering the kids out. They stumbled toward him, some too weak to stand, and he scooped up a boy who couldn't have weighed more than a rifle clip, his thin frame shaking against Marcus's chest. The outpost erupted around them, Reza's team still drawing fire, the Krixani regrouping, their roars growing louder. A second elite charged, its claws slashing, and Marcus shoved the boy behind him, taking the hit across his arm. Blood sprayed, but he drove his knife into the creature's eye, twisting until it fell. The Marines formed a shield, firing as they retreated, the kids between them. Marcus limped at the rear, his vision blurring, the boy clinging to his leg. He saw Reza and Torres breaking back toward them, their faces bloodied but alive, and felt a flicker of relief. But it died fast. The ground shook, a deep rumble rising from the outpost. A Krixani war machine, a towering beast of metal and claws, emerged from the shadows, its cannons glowing hot. "Run!" Marcus yelled, shoving the kids toward the Marines. He turned to face it, alone now, his rifle raised despite the blood pooling at his feet. The machine advanced, its roar deafening, and he bared his teeth. They'd taken too much already. He wasn't giving them this. Overhead, the Vindicator's guns thundered, a salvo raining down, but Marcus didn't look up. He fired, a futile gesture, and braced for the end. The Krixani war machine loomed over Marcus Kane, a colossus of jagged steel and glowing death, its cannons whining as they charged. His rifle spat slugs into its armored hide, sparks flaring where they struck, but it was like throwing pebbles at a tidal wave. Blood dripped from his arm and side, pooling in the dust at his feet, and his legs trembled, threatening to buckle. Behind him, the kids' footsteps faded as the Marines hustled them away, their cries swallowed by the roar of the Vindicator's orbital barrage. The sky lit up, streaks of fire raining down, but the machine kept coming, its claws raking the ground inches from where he stood. Marcus didn't move. He couldn't. Not with the kids so close to safety, not with the promise he'd made burning in his chest. The Krixani had laughed at his warning, torn apart everything he'd sworn to protect. And now they'd pay, even if it cost him everything. He dropped the empty rifle, drew his knife, and squared his shoulders, a snarl twisting his lips. "Come on, you bastard," he muttered, voice lost in the chaos. "Let's finish this." The machine lunged, a claw swiping down, and Marcus dove aside, the impact cratering the earth where he'd been. Pain exploded through his wounds, but he rolled to his feet, slashing at a hydraulic line on its leg. Black fluid sprayed, and the machine staggered, its cannons firing wild, carving gouges into the ruins. Above, the Vindicator's salvos hammered closer, one slamming into the outpost's wall, sending debris raining down. Marcus ducked under another claw, his knife finding a joint, and twisted until something snapped. The machine screeched, a sound that rattled his bones, but it wasn't enough. He heard Reza shouting his name, distant and desperate, and glanced back to see her sprinting toward him, Torres at her side, their weapons blazing. "Get back!" he roared, but they didn't stop, firing at the machine's sensors, drawing its attention. A cannon swung toward them, and Marcus's heart lurched. He threw himself at its leg, stabbing deep, anything to keep it focused on him. The beam fired, missing Reza by a hair, and she stumbled, cursing, but kept coming. The ground shook again, not from the machine but from something new, dropships, more Marines, their engines a thunderous chorus, reinforcements from the Vindicator, hitting the dirt hard, their rifles cutting through the Krixani stragglers swarming from the outpost. The machine turned, distracted, and Marcus seized the chance, climbing its leg, his blood-slick hands slipping as he hauled himself toward its core. Every move was agony, his vision swimming, but he saw those kids' faces, the girl's cracked glass eyes, the boy's frail grip, and pushed harder. Reza reached him first, grabbing his leg to steady him as he stabbed into a glowing panel. "You're insane, sir!" she yelled, her voice raw. Torres joined her, blasting at the machine's joints, and together they fought, a desperate trio against a titan. The panel sparked, then erupted, and the machine convulsed, throwing Marcus off. He hit the ground hard, air rushing from his lungs, and watched as it staggered, cannons dimming, before a final Vindicator strike tore through its chest, reducing it to a smoking wreck. Silence fell, heavy and surreal, broken only by the crackle of flames and the hum of dropships. Marcus lay there, chest heaving, blood soaking the dirt beneath him. Reza dropped to her knees beside him, her hands pressing against his side, her face pale. "Stay with me, damn it," she said, her voice cracking. Torres stood guard, shotgun trembling in his grip, his eyes scanning the ruins for more threats. The Marines swept in, securing the kids, their voices a distant buzz. Marcus forced himself up, ignoring Reza's protests, and staggered toward the group. The girl from the pen was there, clutching a younger boy, her tears cutting tracks through the grime on her face. "You came back," she whispered, and it hit him harder than any claw, because he almost hadn't. "We're not done," he rasped, looking past her to the horizon where Krixani ships still darkened the sky. The Vindicator had cleared the orbit, but pockets of resistance remained on the ground, and Marcus knew they'd fight to the last. He turned to Reza, his voice steady despite the pain. "Get the kids to the dropships, I'm finishing this." "Sir, you can barely stand," she argued, but he shook his head. "They don't get to walk away from this," he said, his gray eyes cold as steel. "Not after what they did?" He picked up a fallen rifle, checked the clip, and started walking, the weight of his promise driving him forward. The kids were safe for now, but the Krixani hadn't paid enough. Not yet. Reza cursed under her breath, then followed, Torres at her side. The Marines rallied behind them, a battered army of humans who'd lost too much to stop. The war wasn't over. It wouldn't be until every last Krixani learned what happened when you crossed that line. The horizon glowed with the faint orange of Praxis 9's dawn, a cruel mockery of peace over a world soaked in blood and ash. Marcus Kane limped through the wreckage, his rifle a crutch as much as a weapon, each step a defiance of the pain tearing through his body. His side was a mess of blood and torn flesh, his arm numb from the elbow down, but he kept moving, driven by a fire that refused to die. Behind him, Reza and Torres flanked the Marines, their faces grim, their weapons stained with Krixani ichor. The kids were safe, ferried to the Vindicator's dropships, but Marcus wasn't done. Not while a single Crixani still breathed on this rock. The last stronghold lay ahead, a mining complex turned fortress, its walls reinforced with scavenged steel, Crixani warriors swarming like a hive kicked open. The Vindicator had pounded it from orbit, but the survivors dug in, their guttural roars a challenge Marcus couldn't ignore. He'd seen too much. The pens, the severed arm, the girl's cracked glass eyes, to let them slink away. They'd been warned. They'd laughed. Now they'd face the consequences. "Reza, Torres, left flank," he rasped, his voice barely above a whisper but sharp as a blade. "Marines, with me. We hit the center, no mercy." Reza hesitated, her eyes flicking to his wounds, but he glared her down, and she nodded, slipping away with Torres. The Marines fanned out, their boots crunching over debris, their silence a testament to what they'd lost. Marcus led them forward, a battered figure at the head of a storm. The Crixani met them head-on, claws flashing, turrets spitting fire. Marcus fired, his rifle bucking against his shoulder, slugs tearing through chitin. A warrior lunged and he sidestepped, driving his knife into its throat, feeling the hot spray of ichor on his face. The Marines fought beside him, a wall of human fury, their rifles and grenades turning the courtyard into a slaughterhouse. From the left, Reza and Torres struck, their attack splitting the enemy's focus, and the Crixani line buckled. Marcus pushed deeper, his vision blurring, his breath ragged. He saw a Crixani commander, smaller than the last, but its armor gleamed with rank, directing the defense from a raised platform. It locked eyes with him, mandibles twitching, and he knew it recognized him, knew what he'd come to do. He charged, ignoring the pain, the blood, the screams around him. A claw raked his leg, but he kept going, slamming into the commander, his knife finding its chest. They fell together, a tangle of steel and flesh, and he stabbed again and again until it stopped moving. The fight drained from the Crixani then, their roars turning to shrieks as the humans closed in. Marcus staggered to his feet, leaning on the platform's edge, watching as the last of them fell. The complex grew quiet, the only sounds the crackle of fires and the distant hum of dropships. Reza appeared at his side, her face streaked with dirt and blood, her pistol still smoking. "It's over, sir," she said, her voice soft but firm. "They're gone." Marcus didn't answer right away. He looked out over the ruins, the bodies, human and Crixani alike, littering the ground. He thought of the kids, safe now, but scarred forever, of the families who'd never know this dawn. "Not over," he muttered, his gray eyes hard. "Not until they're all gone. Every last one, everywhere." Reza didn't argue. She knew him too well. Torres joined them, his shotgun slung over his shoulder, a rare quiet in his eyes. The Marines gathered, their faces a mix of exhaustion and resolve, and Marcus felt it. The unspoken bond, the shared promise. Humans weren't the strongest, the fastest, or the toughest, but they didn't break. Not when it mattered. He turned to the sky, where the Vindicator hung like a sentinel, its guns silent now. The Crixani had underestimated them, thought them weak, prey to be culled. They'd learned too late what humans became when you crossed that line, when you harmed their kids. Marcus had warned them, and he'd kept his word. Praxis 9 was free, its survivors safe, but the war stretched beyond this planet, into the stars where the Crixani still lurked. "Get me to a ship," he said, his voice steady despite the tremble in his limbs. "We're not stopping here." Reza nodded, helping him stand, and the group moved toward the dropships, a battered army ready for the next fight. The kids would heal, in time, but Marcus wouldn't. Not until the Crixani were a memory, a lesson carved into the galaxy. Harm a human child, and you won't live to regret it. As the dropship lifted off, Marcus looked down at Praxis 9, its scars fading into the distance. He closed his eyes, the girl's whisper echoing in his mind. You came back, and made a silent vow. He'd keep coming back, again and again, until there was nothing left to fight. For them, for all of them.